How do you balance the fellowships between countries? The the first the first consideration is that we will be looking at the first evaluation criteria really is on the scientific merit. Yeah. So all proposals submitted will first be taken through a review process to evaluate their scientific merit, after which then the consideration of countries will be done. So the idea is that we are supposed to give at least 40 scholarships or 40 research grants to at least 40 researchers from 40 countries, but that does not mean that it will be done at the expense of scientific merit. So if through the first screening, only maybe 20 countries or 30 countries make it through the threshold for scientific merit, those are the only ones that will be considered, okay? So that means there's a possibility of even having more than one grant in one country, depending on the proposals that are submitted. So Jean Vermeulen, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your names correctly, is asking a question with regards to the funding policy. Does this program allow for additional funding from another third-party sources for the project? So we are open to proposals. We are happy to see what you propose depending on the scope of work and the like, so that ultimately, if we get matching funds, something that is supposed to add value to the work that we've already mentioned that we'll be supporting as provided for in the call for applications, such additional support is welcome. But we need to see that clearly defined in your proposals, that we get to see the value add that they bring to your proposal. Someone is asking, does the grant prescribe rates on bursaries, or do we use institutional guidelines for bursary allocations? Please use the institutional guidelines. Remember, we've not predefined, knowing very well that the rates could be different from different countries. So for that reason, as the PI, you have the responsibility of coming up with the rates based on the HR provisions or the guidelines from your host institutions. Are the bursaries inside or outside direct costs? So again, please work with the grant team, the finance team at your host institution country, so that they're able to advise you accordingly in terms of how to allocate different costs. So if the support you are giving qualifies as personnel costs, then you put it under personnel costs. But if the grant accountant advises that support is better off under direct research costs or otherwise, then you do that. But ultimately, it's part of the application or the proposal process. And there's a document called a budget guideline. So if you go to the ARISE webpage, under budget notes, you will get a link to the budget guidelines. So that document gives you an overview of what your budget should look like, okay? Can the bursary fund student exchange visits to within and outside of Africa? Yes. So long as it's part of the work, the proposed work that is supposed to be done. So there is a principle or a provision in the call for applications that says research visit should not exceed 6 months cumulative. So if you're the PI and you want to go to another institution outside your host institution, that the visit should not exceed 6 months cumulatively. Okay. Someone is asking if we can have the presentation. It will be shared on the webpage after this. Is it compulsory to spread the grant over a 5-year period? Again, the call provides for up to 5 years. Up to 5 years. So again, that will be dependent on the scope of work that is proposed. Okay, and the same goes for the budget. Does this have to be 500,000 euros? If your scope of work can only requires 300,000, that is what you budgeted for. You budget for. You don't have to spend all the 500. Okay. Someone else is asking, I also noticed that at some point that my institution name is not in your database. So if you're submitting an application and on the application platform, you don't get to see the your institution, as part of those that are already pre-registered in our system. Please send us an email and we'll be happy to add it, okay, so that you're able to apply. Sorry, for colleagues that are raising their hands, because I can't keep track of the hands, I would suggest that you type your questions in the Q&A platform so that I'm able to try and respond. Sorry about that. It's just that we have at least 15 hands and I don't know who raised them first. So I'll go through the Q&A. Okay. What are the possible numbers of granted by countries? I think I already answered that question. Okay. Please amend all mandatory required fields listed below. Leader applicant. Before submitting. So basically, everyone is accessing the same forms, that the same application form that you are using to apply. We have already received a number of applications as we speak. So that means the application form is working fine. Where you are experiencing difficulties, please feel free to get in touch with our team, and we'll be happy to, help you go through the technical IT issues. Okay. Someone is asking, when we say up to 500,000 and up to 5 years, would the proposal be eligible if I want funding? I think I've already answered that question. I would like to ask, what is your consideration of demonstrable leadership experience? So that is left at your discretion at the PI. But typically, at this, the 2 to 7 year post PhD period, you're likely to see people that have already had, for example, a postdoctoral fellowship, someone that has supervised students, postgraduate students, or published papers and articles in various channels. So all that adds up to what we would call considerable research leadership experience. Could be also that you've been in industry in a related field that then in your definition qualifies, so as part of your research leadership experience. So what I'm trying to say is, in your application, please feel free to provide some justification or a quick write-up that sums up your research leadership experience. Someone is asking if the country Burundi is not enough represented. Like I said, the applications are open to all countries in Africa. That includes Burundi. Okay. Is the application different from affiliates? Yes, absolutely. There are many grants at the African Academy of Sciences at any given time. So if you're responding to the ARISE grant, please select the ARISE grant. Okay. And the closing date is 30th of July. Someone is asking about the PhD, when to apply, please note the 2 to 7 years. I should also mention here that for, sometimes some person, an applicant may have taken a break, for example, to go on maternity leave or something like that. And that means that they may have obtained their PhD longer than the 7-year ceiling, but it's justifiable. So in a case like that, please feel free to submit your application and provide justification. The review panel will then look at the situation on a case-by-case basis and make a determination. Okay. Okay. So someone is asking for us to clarify what the objectives are of the African Union and or ARISE PP grant that these proposals need to conform to. I already provided that, and the information is also in the guide for applicants. Okay. Someone is asking if we have target countries or if every country have equal opportunity. Absolutely, it's open to all. It's open to all countries in Africa. It's only that the funding is limited, so that means the number of grants issued will be limited. But the at least 40 country target applies to every country. Depends on the proposals that are received and the scientific merit that is reflected in the proposals that we receive. Okay. How do I get assistance if I encounter problems with the online registration system? Please send us an email and someone from our team will be able to assist you. Okay. Just to confirm, can an applicant residing abroad for a while have the chance to apply knowing they'll be returning home? Yes, so long as you're an African national and you're proposing to implement your grant in an African institution, subject to the qualification, the eligibility criteria provided in section 3.6 of the guide for applicants, yes, you're welcome to apply. And if you get granted, you then have to move back to Africa, the host institutions that you put in your application to implement your grant. Who is the letter of support meant to be addressed to? Just the ARISE grant team. It doesn't have to be a specific individual. Okay, just address it. Have the letter of support addressed to the ARISE grant team. Someone says they have sent an email, but no reply. The inbox, if you send an email as of last evening, we have responded to all those. So please double check that you've used the correct email address that is already given on our web page. And if you indeed use the correct email address and we didn't respond, please feel free to forward to us. But as far as I know, that inbox was cleared. Is cleared. The latest was done, I think, last evening, and we received quite a number of emails. So it may not be a prompt response, but at least in a day or two, we aim to have cleared the inbox. Okay. Does leading laboratory research in a research institution, but with no formal postdoc assignation, qualify? This anonymous attendee. If I get you correctly, remember the qualification, the need to have a PhD qualification is mandatory. So if you're asking if you have experience but without a PhD, if you're qualified to apply, then the answer is no. But please let me know if I didn't get your question right. Someone is asking if the ARISE call accepts proposal that focus on socioeconomics. Like I said, all fields of science are welcome to apply. Okay. I should also say that instead of focusing on one discipline, if you feel that your proposal will be better and stronger, by using a transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach, then you're welcome to do so. There's no limitation to a specific field of research. We welcome, for example, like we said earlier, intra-Africa collaborations or collaborations even with, outside of Africa, so long as the provisions of the call are adhered to. Don't limit yourself. Please, if there's value addition by working with someone outside of Africa or outside of your host institution country, you're welcome to do so. Someone is asking if there's a defined structure for the expressions of interest. So the submission is done online. It's an online application form. So the form is done in a way that gives a structure of what you submit in that application. Okay, so please go log in to the system and get a feel of the system. You can, for example, draft something and have it saved for later until you're ready to submit. Okay. Someone is asking, is this supposed to be an individual grant or an institutional grant? The grant is, the applicant is, you could be a group or something, but the person submitting the application is one. an individual. Okay. I should also mention that if granted, the money will be sent to a host institution, not to an individual. So as the PI, you'll be subject to grant terms and the administration procedures of the host institution that you proposed in your application. Someone is asking if there is an age limit. If you mean the chronological age, no, there's no limit. We are focusing on the amount of years after your PhD. Okay. Is it safe to say that the total intended award is 20 million euros per each for 40 ECR? No. Just for avoidance of doubt, it's 500,000 euros per grant for the 5 years for the 5-year period support that you get. So each of the 40 will get up to 500,000 euros. Okay. Hope that is clear. What is the maximum personal cost share of the grant? Is there a limit? We don't have a hard figure, but please refer to the cost guidelines and the budget notes that have been provided for your guidance. Okay. Is there a budget template beyond the 3 categories of personal cost? I should say that as of now, at the expressions of interest, what we need is just a global budget, or the budget items that have been put there are supposed to give us an idea of the global budget. If you make it to the full application stage, then you'll be required to provide a more detailed budget. Okay, there'll be more fields in addition to the provision for you to submit a full budget in Excel or otherwise. Okay. When is the earliest and latest date to start the project? So like I said, the project will begin around April or May of 2022. We hope to have completed the review process by that time. For the reviewers nominated on the expression of interest application, can international researchers be nominated or only Africans? The reviewers can come from any part of the world, so long as they are experts in their field and they are willing to assist in the review process. I should also say that the reviewers you submit are not necessarily the people that are going to review your applications. We already have reviewer panels. It's just that we need, every time we launch a call like this, to revamp our review panels and add new members. And there's actually a possibility that, the people that you're already proposing could be already in our review panel. So we welcome anyone, any reviewer from any part of the world. When you say 1 grant per country, per person, or per institution. So, like I said, the grants are not given to countries or institutions. They are given to individuals, provided that these individuals are hosted in African institutions that meet the eligibility criteria defined in the call for applications. So even when the talk is about 1 grant per country, it should not be seen to mean that we'll be giving these grants to a particular country. However, like I said, for geographical balance, we are trying to achieve at least 40 countries in the ARISE grant. Okay. I keep saying at least because not everyone, for example, would request for all the 500,000. So at the end of the review, during the review process, if we realize that the maximum amount that has been requested does not exceed the limit that has been put aside, there's a possibility for additional grants, so that at least then allows us to give more than the 40 grants that are initially planned for. What are the elements that are required in the manifestation of interest application? So please refer to the guide for applicants and the online application form. You'll be able to see the items that are required. Like I said, you can draft something and come back later with more information, but at least you're able to go through the entire application form without needing to submit it. Okay. Is there any guidance for the annual audit costs? So please benchmark with your host institutions, okay? Usually, every host institution does audits, so that will give you an idea of the amount that you should budget for the audits. Okay, and I keep insisting that usually during our applications, we notice a lot that the PIs decide to be the ones doing their budgets alone. and so that way, as a PI, most of the time they end up missing out on a few things. If you can do the budget alone, well and good, but it will be a benefit to you if you worked with a grant accountant from your host institution, so that way, even at the proposal stage, you're able to capture as much as possible, and that way don't have the risk of having to under budget or over budget. Okay. Do you support research in machine learning? Like I said, every field of research is welcome, or applications from all fields of research are welcome. How can a country or an institution become a host for a RISE program? Like I said, eligibility criteria for host institutions is provided in our guide for applicants. How many expressions of interest can one submit? One application per applicant. You can't do multiple applications. Is it okay if the period of a postdoc is 2 years at the start of the fellowship rather than at the time of submission? Is it okay if the period as a postdoc is 2 years at the start of the fellowship rather than at the time of submission? So like I said, the target is at least 2 years, okay, of post-PhD experience. If you have any particularly, justifiable reasons why that criteria should be exempted for you, then you're welcome to submit your application with that justification. I should also say here that the 2 years post-PhD, the 2 to 7 years post-PhD postdoc experience is not the only consideration for eligibility. So please read all the items listed under eligibility together instead of picking one at a time, okay? In the guidelines, funding support for co-applicants for their time is not listed as fundable item. Is there going to be support for co-applicants or collaborators? So the fact that it's not listed does not mean that it's not allowed. Okay, so that is left at the discretion of the PI. Okay, there is again, it's all about the value addition. If your proposed work, the scope of work that you're proposing to do requires a collaborator, then you need to budget for them adequately. I should also say that there are no co-PIs. It's one PI, okay? It's one applicant working with others. So the person that that is submitting an application is just one PI. There is no possibility for having more than one PI submitting together one application. So like I said, one PI, but you're free to work with others in your research team. Is there feedback on the evaluation of the proposals? Where and who are invited to review the proposal? How is the scoring done? So in the guide for applicants, we've alluded to the evaluation criteria. So globally speaking, the provisions that are given in the guide for applicants constitute what our evaluation criteria is. The specifics will be limited to the review panels and the reviewers themselves. So there will be a scoring metrics, for example, or an evaluation criteria that is used by all the reviewers as they review all the applications. Do we have a template for the preliminary budget? So yes, if you go to the budget notes on the webpage for Arise, you will see the link to budget guide. So in there is a template for the budget. So my advice usually is that as you submit your proposal, do it as though this was the full budget, and then pick the global budget lines that have been provided in the application form, and then when you get to the full application stage, you still be working with the same budget, because I find it easier that way personally. So yes, there is a template if you go to the page that I've told you. Does Arise support salary expenses for researchers who are on self-funded positions at universities? So you have 500,000 euros as a PI. If you need a salary or a stipend from this grant, please feel free to do so. Okay. Someone asking, the budget mentioned stipends, but is not clear. So sometimes it's stipends, sometimes it's salaries, I don't know, allowances, depends on your host institution. So please refer to the HR provisions of your host institution and work with your accountant, like I said, to be able to know how to budget that accordingly. The budget mentions stipends, but it is not clear if this could encompass the full 80% time which is expected. So the 80% threshold is the time commitment requirement for the Arise grant. So the PI must commit at least 80% of their time. That does not stop them from committing 100%. It's only that we expect them to commit at least 80%. So if you're committing 80% or 90% of your full-time FTE equivalent, full-time equivalent on the Arise grant, we expect that if you're charging your time on the grant, then it should be 80%, or the amount of time you spend on this grant should correspond to the budget allocation for your personnel costs. Okay. Okay. There is a requirement that the PI must have been employed as a postdoc researcher or assistant professor for at least 2 years cumulatively. Is this mandatory to have 2 years? Well, like I said, do not look at this requirement as the only requirement. Look at all the eligibility criteria items together. Okay. We are also aware that different universities and countries do this differently. There are universities where you can't become a lecturer unless you've gone through a postdoctoral fellowship. There are countries where you become a lecturer even without the postdoc requirement. So in your application, please give us a write-up or a justification. Package your totality of postdoc research leadership experience. What you think constitutes your postdoctoral research leadership or postdoctoral research leadership in general together. And then submit your application. Okay. I'd like to find out more about clinical researchers who have fellowships through residency training, but not PhDs. Unfortunately, like I said, a PhD is a mandatory requirement for this grant. Future grants may be different, but this particular one requires that you have a PhD. Given that the call is so broad and open, how do we manage the quality assessment across disciplines? I mean, when we were designing the call, we put all this into considerations. And one way is by having field-specific review panels, okay? So that if it's someone in artificial intelligence, and if it's an application from artificial intelligence, we have a reviewer panel that specializes in that part, that specific field. And the same applies for these other research fields. Okay. Someone is still asking about the countries of all countries are not at the same level of doing science, and by splitting proposals to award to each country may not support the best science. The bottom line is that we are trying not to leave anyone behind. Okay. But like I said, there is a minimum threshold for scientific merit that you're looking for in these applications. Okay, so if a particular country does not provide or does not produce candidates that meet the minimum scientific quality eligibility criteria, then unfortunately we do not have to award, because we have to achieve the geographic balance. Okay. Having said that, we're giving this opportunity to everyone from all countries, so that everyone is able to submit the applications. And once the first screening, which is on scientific merit, has been done, then the geographical consideration will come into play. But like I said earlier, if we don't have countries, applicants from specific, particular countries not really meeting that minimum scientific threshold that we're looking for, we don't have to award to those countries. Okay. Someone is asking about the rules for indirect cost for this application. The indirect cost for this particular grant is 7% of all eligible direct costs. Okay. So please work with that number. Are there any, on indirect costs, one of the ways to work on that is to look at the distribution, because even indirect cost is granulated according to institutional policies and the like. So that if there are some of the costs that would traditionally be grouped under indirect costs, but that qualify to be, for example, other direct research costs or things like that, working with the grant accountant from your host institution will help you allocate those costs accordingly, so that the amount that then goes to indirect cost is mainly for the overheads or things like that, according to the provisions of your host institution. There's a question on whether there are any future plans to extend the funding to postgraduate students at the PhD level. We don't know. As of now, our work really focuses on postdoc, post-PhD and above. But that is for the program or the third goal. Remember the goal we talked about, identifying and supporting rising research leaders. So that is one program. There are other programs of the academy, like the programs on innovation and entrepreneurship. You may be aware of Grand Challenges Africa. That does not require you to be even a degree holder in the first place. So long as you have an innovative idea, you're able to be funded. Other programs, including some of the programs that we have under our postdoctoral fellowships, that don't really limit you to 2 years or 7 years post-PhD. So the requirement in terms of eligibility is grant specific. And for this particular one, the idea is that you must hold a PhD to be supported. However, we have required our PIs to engage at least 4 master's students and at least 2 PhDs. It's actually 2 to 4 PhDs and 4 to 8 master's students, depending on the scope of work that is being proposed. This here is supposed to build the capacity of the postgraduate students, so that tomorrow, as you become established as a PI, you have people that would have benefited from your experience to then be able to even win their own grants. So that is the ripple effect that we talk about when we are providing this holistic support to emerging research leaders. And one of the indicators, as you will see later in the review process, one of the measures of success of this program is to actually get to see emerging research leaders become, the fellows of this grant becoming leaders, research leaders, providing research leadership. If you're able to graduate 4 master's students, for example, and 2 PhDs, that will be at least 6 students supported through your leadership. That already begins to make you a research leader. Okay. You work with the research team directly or in collaboration with the research institution. So, this is for you really. So you, in the proposed work that you're submitting to us, the scope of work defines or determines the constitution of your research team. So if your work requires that you have, in addition to the master students and PhD students that we talk about in our requirements, if there is need for you to engage a postdoctoral researcher or a technician or a collaborator in a different field, or, you put it in your proposal. So this is really left at your discretion as the person submitting an application. So we have only provided the minimum requirements of the research teams, in the sense that you have to be there as the PI and have to work with at least 4 masters and at least 2 PhD students. The other members of your team are at your discretion. Okay. Does this funding allow ONGs, ONG applications? ONG, this means non-governmental organizations. I guess the Mauritian term could be French. There is a criteria that we put there in terms of eligibility criteria for host institutions. So please read section 3.6 of our guide for applicants for guidance on the eligible host institutions. So basically, the grant is not open only to universities, even research institutions or other non-university, non-teaching institutions can qualify so long as they meet the criteria set out in 3.6. Okay. Given that the code is so broad, how do you manage the scientific quality assessment across disciplines? I think I've talked about this. The 2 to 7 year post-PhD experience, I think people still want us to be flexible with this requirement. Like I said, this is the baseline. This is the best requirement. If you have any justifiable reasons why it should be considered and you're outside of this box, you're welcome to apply, provide a justification, and then our reviewers, our review committee or review panels will make a determination. I would like to submit my expression of interest. I'm not able to find my institution. So please, like I said, send us an email. We'll be happy to add it if it's not already there. Are you hoping to run the grants on an annual basis? No, for now it's a one-off. It's a pilot, remember? So that depending on how this goes, then we can motivate for further support in the coming years. As of now, we're only focusing on the pilot. I should also say that this is not the only grant of the Academy. Every other time, there are calls for proposals. So one best way to make sure that you don't miss out on anything is to subscribe to our mailing list. If you go to www.assciences.africa, that is the website for the African Academy of Sciences, you will see at the bottom somewhere a link to subscribe to our mailing list. That way, you don't get to miss out on anything. I would like to know if applicants who finished their PhD more than 7 years ago, again, I think I've talked about that. I totally understand the need for people that are outside the 2 to 7 post-PhD bracket to be included in this grant. I appreciate that need. But the grant has limits. Again, being a pilot, there are specific objectives that the grant seems, endeavors to achieve. And we think that focusing in that post-PhD bracket will give us the best results. However, like I said, if you have any particularly justifiable reasons why it should be included, please feel free to submit your application with a justification. Can a team of researchers apply? Yes, if they become part of your research team. You can submit as the PI, but with others, so long as the PI is one. In your Ishango online system, there is no provision for including names and details of co-PI. Again, that's because, like I said, it's only one PI. Okay. The full application stage may have fields where you provide additional research team members. But for now, we're only interested in the PI. Okay. have it somewhere in your proposal. There's nothing that limits you from, listing your research team in your proposal. So please feel free to do so, even if our Ishango online system does not provide for it. Must collaborating institutions be universities and research centers, or can it be also other establishments? So we have only defined what our host institutions should be like. We leave the rest at your discretion as the PI, provided that there is a justification for it, and that there is need actually. So for instance, if you need to do sequencing and you don't have a sequencing machine in terms of genetics, I don't know, I'm a physical scientist, so I may not necessarily know what goes into this. But if one of the things you need to do in your proposed work is that you have to take your samples to another institution because there is no facility to do that at your home institution, you're welcome to do so. Just provide a justification so that the reviewers get to be in the same page with you. Okay. The guide for applicants says there is up to 6 months at partnerships or collaborating universities. But is this for the PI or the PhD master students in the grant? Both. So 6 months each. If you have a PhD student, remember the postgraduate students are supposed to be working under you so that they get your leadership. If you're going to send them away for 3 years of the 5 years, then it means they get limited support or leadership from you. So it's up to 6 months for if there is need. Again, remember there's a budget consideration to this. If there is need for them to go, or for a particular student to go outside of your host institution for some period, they can do so long as cumulatively that does not exceed 6 months per individual. That applies to you as well as the PI. I should also say that all the research visits will be monitored, and I think you may need to even seek pre-authorization from the AS before that happens. So you can budget for it in your grant application, but then at the implementation stage, there will be a requirement that you notify us, you alert us that you plan to do a research visit also, so that we're able to first be aware that you're actually going abroad, and also ensure that there is the research visits that you want to do add value to a proposal or to a project work. And ultimately, actually, really, most of the time, the essence is to ensure that, like I said, there is value to your research project, but also there's value for money in the proposed activities in your research visits. Someone is asking if there's a template for expressions of interest. I can guess confidently that you have not visited our application portal, would have otherwise seen it. So please log in to our application portal. You will see the set of questions or questionnaires, the questions that are there for you to fill. So by filling those questions, that is the application. Okay. We use a system, in our university, we use a system of a lecturer, senior lecturer, associate professor. Like I said, we are aware that different universities in different countries do things differently, provided that you are able to, package that information and tell us this is what to you qualifies for your research leadership experience. Please do and put it in your application, and the reviewer panels will be looking at that. Hashim, if you can hear me, I've texted you the question in Arabic, so I'm going to switch to the Arabic channel, and please read it to me so that I can respond. Hashim, can you hear me? Okay. But you can read the question. I've sent it on chat to Hashim. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So the question is there a fixed number of awards allocated per country or region? I think I've already answered this. But please let me know if you need any further clarification. The question was, okay, 1 second. So there is a question whether you can be a PI in your grant application and be a collaborator in another. Okay, I see the idea of trying to make sure that you don't left out in case you don't get your grant, which is okay, provided that you're able to remember the 80%, at least 80% time commitment. Okay, so that if you are listed in multiple applications, you may need to tell us how you intend to split your time accordingly. And so basically what I'm trying to say is you can be a PI one application and listed as a collaborator or a partner, I don't know, whichever form it is, in another, provided that the 80% minimum time commitment is explained and justified in either case. Okay. I still see people asking me if this is different from the affiliate call. Like I said, at any given time, it's possible to see multiple calls open. If you go to the Shango system, just pick the one that is of interest to you. In this case, the Arise call. I'm a member of a new non-governmental institution. How to make sure that my institution is an eligible one? You refer to the guide for applicants that we provided. There is an eligibility criteria for a host institution. So please read and see if your institution meets these eligibility criteria. I think, let me preempt another potential question. You don't have to move out of your host institution. So if you're working at a particular university or research institution, and that institution qualifies as a host institution, you don't have to move out to go to another institution. So you can still implement your RISE grant in your current host institution. However, that does not limit you from moving out. If you feel you want to go conduct your research in another country or in another host institution, you're also welcome to do so. You need to contact them, tell them your intentions, and so that they're able to give you that letter of support. Okay, and then as we move to the full application stage, you'll be requiring particular more detailed information from the host institution. But as of now, at the expressions of interest stage, we are only interested to just see a letter of support from your proposed host institution. Okay. And people are asking whether this needs to come from a head of department, a dean, a provost, a vice chancellor, any of those. Okay, any of those is okay. But when we get to the full application, then we become more specific, okay, in terms of where we want it to come from. And at the full application stage, it may have to be a vice chancellor or provost or that level, director of research or something, depending on your host institution. As of now, happy if you can get from any of those that have been listed. Okay. Question on collaborations with the universities within a country, within Africa, outside of Africa. Again, that's allowed depending on the scope of work or the proposal that you're submitting to us. And there has to be a justification. You can't just say, for example, you're going to, there is networking and skills transfer. So if you need some specific expertise that you could use for your project, but it can only be available outside of your host institution, then you can enlist a collaborator. Yeah. But if what you are requesting to collaborate on is already available where you are, then that does, it will be difficult for you to convince a reviewer why you need to collaborate with someone outside of your host institution when you already have the resource locally. Okay. Is there a problem with the grant management system? Failed to register. Like I said, we have already received a number of applications. Over 1,000 applicants are already doing things on our grant management system. So that means the system is working. But if you have difficulties, please write to us, send us an email. Our technical team would be able to support you. Okay. Kindly advise on the transdisciplinary nature of the grant and if it is required, if it is required to work across countries, how could cross-country collaborations be funded? So the nature of the transdisciplinarity of your work is at your discretion. It depends on the proposal, the work that you are proposing to do. So please, as the PI, make that determination, okay? With reference, of course, to the provisions of the call as detailed in the guide for applicants. Where can I find a repository of previous funded research projects? Please note that this is a pilot. That means it's the first. So there is no repository of this. I don't know if it helps, but the ARISE grant is funded by the European Commission, like I said. And most of this, a good aspect, a big chunk of the proposals or the call for proposals is modeled on the ERC, the European Research Council grants, starter grants, so to speak. And the ERC website, you will see a database of previous. I think there should be some information on previous funding or projects that have been funded. So maybe you may want to run through that website to get an idea of what a funded proposal would look like. But that does not mean that it's going to follow the same format and shape. But getting an idea of what funded proposals in general look like, that could be a good place to look. Okay. Where can I find a repository? Oh, sorry, I've already answered that. Are tuition for the students covered by the grant or the students pay their tuition? I mean, that's at your discretion, and the discretion, working with reference to the provisions of your host institution. The bottom line is, please don't start off a student and then leave them hanging. The idea is that you're able to, as you implement the project, move with the students to completion of their programs. We wouldn't want to see a situation where a student then is left struggling. Okay. Does the grant allow for the purchase of a big research equipment, e.g. a weather station? That's a good question. Please refer to the budget guidelines, the provisions. There is the AIRS cost guidelines that gives you an idea of what you're looking for, even as we support the grantees. And if you have specific questions on the equipment that you want to purchase, please get in touch with us. We'll put you through with our finance team or grants team to be able to determine what big enough or big research equipment is. But basically, the bottom line is start with the budget notes provided on our website. Okay. Someone is still asking if they can submit multiple applications. The answer is no. We want to give a fair chance to everyone. Would like to know if there's a certain length of the research proposal, part of the expressions of interest. As I said before, the proposal is submitted through our online form, an online system. every field provides a limitation. So they have, the number of words, for example, per particular field. So that will define, or that will guide you in terms of the length. Someone is asking about the email they can use. It's already on the webpage for Arise, and I'm going to ask my colleague to type it, both the link to the Arise webpage and the email address to the it will be typed shortly on the chat function. Okay. Collaborations with people from elsewhere, I've already answered that. So someone is saying the application is ready for submission apart from some validation section that is not working. So usually the validation tab tells you which parts of your proposal need to be fixed. Please try that. But if you get any difficulties, you're welcome to contact us and we'll help you sort out the issue. Someone said they didn't get me clearly on the intention to select 40 proposals from 40 countries. Are you saying you will select one proposal per country? So here's what I said. The first eligibility, the first evaluation criteria is on scientific merit. Okay, so all applications will be processed and reviewed based on the scientific merit. And there will be a threshold, okay, below which, if an application, regardless of where it comes from, if that application does not meet that minimum eligibility criteria, or in terms of scientific merit, that proposal will not be considered in the next stage of the review process. So that once we now have long listed the applications that meet the minimum scientific merit criteria, then we now look at things like the scientific geographical representation. The ambition is to award at least 40 researchers in at least 40 countries, okay? But that does not mean if we only have 20 countries meeting the minimum scientific eligibility criteria, that we will award to those others that didn't meet that criteria. The hope is that everyone, that will have qualifying candidates from all the, is it 54 or 55 countries in Africa, so that then we don't have to make that consideration. But ultimately, the ambition is that we have to award at least 40 grants in at least 40 countries. We'll see how that works in terms of the proposals that are submitted to us. At the end of the process, it's possible to actually see more than one grant in one country. Okay. Someone says that they have sent at least 2 emails over a week now and no reply yet. Please ensure that you have the correct email address. We've just posted on our chat the right email address. Like I said, I can tell you for sure that all emails that had been received as of yesterday have been responded to. I see and we'll be responding to the rest as they come in. Yeah. Do I get it clearly that one must have obtained a PhD 2 years ago, even if they have publications and other achievements? Thank you. Yeah. So the post-PhD, remember, there are PhD students that are going to be engaged in your project. So you ought to hold a PhD yourself to be able to, provide that leadership or supervision, for example. And I know this is holding a PhD does not necessarily make you the best supervisor or best leader. But for purposes of this grant, we have required that the PIs must hold PhDs awarded at least 2 years ago, and at most 7 years ago. The budget template is in dollars. Yes, unfortunately, our system captured the application in dollars. The wording says budget in USD, but the instruction says that you need to submit your budget in euros. we didn't want to change because we actually received, I must say, the first application was received within days. In the first 5 days, we had already received the first application. So we didn't want to change that and then affect someone that had already received an application. So while the system says that the system mentions USD, the budget should be submitted in euros. However, we are not going to penalize those that get confused by our system. And before, at the full application stage, we'll be confirming with the applicants if the budgets that were submitted were in USD or euros. Our preference is that you submit in euros. So we are consistent, but we will check with you, as we get to the review process to ensure that we have captured the currency of your budget. Can I, from one African country and apply in another country? Yes, you can. You don't have to. I think I've answered this already. You are welcome to apply from your home or your nationality, your country of nationality, but that does not stop you from applying to do your research in another country. Okay, so long as you're able to get the host institution support in your proposed country of research. I see quite a number of questions on the guidelines or the template for the expressions of interest. Again, like I said, please read the guide for applicants in full. I know it's quite a number of pages, but it has quite some useful information so that you're able to submit, to have a complete understanding of the process before you begin submitting your application. Applications will not be received via email. You must submit through the online application system, Ishango. And like I said, we already have more than 1,000 people that have already been through the process. And it means that it's working. And we're happy to support you if you experience any technical issues. Okay. Where you get the link for the application, it's on the webpage. So it's both in the webpage or the guide for the application. So the budget template, the guide for the budget guide, the frequently asked questions, the application link, all those things are contained in. If you read our webpage for the Arise grant, you'll see all that information provided. And we've also shared with you our email address in case you have difficulties locating some of these documents. We are happy to assist. Okay. Can another person replace the PI in case the PI will be away for 9 months? No, please. You are going to be the only PI for this grant. Okay. You cannot, for example, be awarded the grant and then outsource it to some other person. So you have to be there during the grant implementation. However, if for some reason, and this now refers to the general provisions of our grant terms and conditions, if for one reason or another you cannot continue implementing the grant first, number one, implementing the grant at the host institution, there is a policy, we have a policy guideline on what the process that is followed to transfer the grant from one host institution to another. There's also a process, our policy guideline on how to transfer a grant from one PI to another. But that's a lengthy process that I wouldn't encourage you to even start thinking about at this stage. If you're proposing to do this wonderful work that you want to do in response to the Arise grant, please purpose to be the PI throughout, so that at least then even for monitoring and measuring impact becomes easier for us. But in the unfortunate event that you can't continue on the grant or continue implementing at the host institution, there is a procedure on how that can happen. The question on eligibility or the post-PhD experience, I've answered that enough times. I would refer you to the guide for applicants and the recordings right from the first webinar and even the recording from this webinar will be available on the webpage. I'm in the academic field, but I've not supervised postgraduates, only undergraduate students, and also published papers. So like I said, this is not just the publications or supervision is not the only thing that constitutes your research leadership. So please just, like I said, put together a justification or information that speaks on your research leadership experience. Can you please share one or two winning proposals? I think I've answered this. Someone still asking if there's a limit, a page limit. The short answer is yes, because the online questionnaire has a limitation in the number of words or the documents that can be attached. So please refer to the submission template. So if those that are asking for a template or guideline on how to submit a concept note or proposal. So like I said, this is the application is submitted online through the online application system. If we can apply to any institution in Africa, regardless of the citizenship, yes, please, that's allowed. The requirement is that you are an African national. And unfortunately, that leaves out people that are holders of permanent residence in Africa or others. So the qualification is that you must be an African national. Or more correctly said, a national of an African Union member state. As far as I think almost all countries in Africa are members of the African Union, but please double check just in case. Someone asked me the question on the potential reviewers. Like I said, they can come from any part of the world, so long as they are adequately experienced to review the applications for ARISE. The currency, please ignore the USD wording on the application form and submit in euros. However, anyone that submits by a mistake, through the confusion created by the online system will not be penalized. We will double check with the applicants before, just to ensure that we have the correct currency. Can bench or research cost be paid to collaborating institutions? I mean, it's up to you as the PI and, considering the provisions of the call, the information provided in the guide for applicants. So please work with the grant accountants in your host institutions to guide you on how to allocate various costs. How many researchers are expected to be in a research team? I've answered that question. It depends on you, the PI, and the scope of work that you are proposing to do. Can the PhD master students be the ones that are registered in collaborating universities? Not necessarily those registered at the host institution where the PI is located. The PhD and master students should be registered or will be registered during the implementation of the ARISE grant. You don't have to begin recruiting students now before the grant is awarded. So once the grant is awarded, then you can do the recruitment of students following the guidelines and HR provisions of your host institution. And they should be based at your host institution, where you are as the PI. Remember, they're supposed to be learning from you, even as they assist you as your research assistants. Okay. Someone is asking if we require an external audit or internal audit is sufficient. So the requirement is that you budget for audit of your grants. And that does not take away the responsibility of the heirs as the implementing institution to conduct audits. So we will be, arranging for audits where required. But yours as the PR at this point, at the point of the proposal application, a proposal submission stage, all you need to do is budget for an audit. Of course, benefiting from information from your host institution. Then when the time for audit comes during the grant implementation, we'll be working with our grant team, our finance team at the heirs to plan and also agree on how to conduct the audits, whether it be external or internal. That will be decided on at the implementation stage. Those that are asking the fields of research that are allowed, the answer is this is from all fields of scholarship. All fields of science are welcome to apply. So someone has referred to the cost guidelines, and they are quoted that in the cost guideline document, overheads are indicated at 0 for governmental organizations and 15 for all kinds of others, but specifically for non-universities. Is this correct? No, please, it's 0 to 15 in general. And the cost guidelines provides a general guide that leaves it, it's the amount of overheads that is allowed is grant specific. So for this particular one, it's a maximum of 7%, of indirect cost. And this applies to all, whether it's a governmental institution or non-governmental institution that meets the eligibility criteria in our guide for applicants. It's up to 7%. We welcome those that want to charge 0%. I mean, if your institution wouldn't want to charge a direct cost on this grant, please don't force them to. They're welcome to. That will be their contribution to science, and it's actually encouraged. However, where there is need to put a charge on this, it should be up to 7%. Okay. What is meant by the class of a qualification in the application form? I wish I understood what that means. But if you're, generally speaking, on the application form, if you're filling on your CV, providing details on, the schools or the education, your educational training history, sometimes you may be asked to provide information on when the qualification was attained. Was that a class of year 2000, 2010, which year? I think that is what generally I would understand class in this context to mean. But if I'm wrong, please come back with a clarification on the question, and I'll be happy to respond. Let me check with my colleagues if there's any burning questions. I know time is running out and we still have a number of questions. Someone is talking about buying a vehicle for projects. That could be one of those big equipment that we're talking about. I wouldn't say yes or no at this point. Just do your budget and justification, and that decision will be reached at before award, so to speak. So if there is a justifiable need for you to buy a car or a vehicle for your project, put it there in your proposal and put the justification for it. Before grant award, there will be a budget challenge from our end where our finance team sits with you and then you review the budgets again and ensure that you now have the final budget. So the extent of support in terms of equipment will be agreed on at that point of the application, the candidate selection process. Okay, anything else from your... No, as my colleagues come through many questions that have come through, many thanks, by the way, we really appreciate. We have at least 200 questions. I'm hoping that by the next few minutes we'll be able to cover most of them. So someone asking that you specify that in the case of cross-country collaborations, at least 70% of the research team should be of the same nationality as the host institution. Is that obligatory? Yes, it is. Remember the requirement that they need to have this research hosted in at least 40 countries is specifically for this reason. You don't give, we don't want just the applicant by name of a host institution to be based in country A, but by implementation, most of the research is done elsewhere. So that is why we put the 70% limit, so that that constitutes, it's also for capacity building for the institution in question. So that if there are 5 people in your research team, at least 3 are the research assistants or postdoc students or postgraduate students from that host institution, then you're able to leave a significant footprint in that institution. So that is the essence, really, that as you benefit from the host institution, you are also benefiting the host. The host institution also benefits from your research. I hope that is clear. However, I should add here that if there is need for you to do, some of the activities outside of the host institution, that is different from the composition of your research team. Okay. It can be, for instance, that this is a research that is working on multiple countries, and for that reason, you may need to do scoping meetings or workshops or validation exercises in some of these countries for stakeholder buy-in and engagement. That should be allowed. It's so long as I'm imagining if I'm going to host a workshop out of my host institution, I don't have to recruit staff in that second country or third country to do that. All I need to do is procure services or service provider or work in collaboration with a host and another host country to, institution to help me host that workshop. So I hope that clarifies. But the principal team that is implementing your grant should be comprised of 70% nationality. The membership of that team should be 70% the same nationality with your host institution. Okay, someone is asking, is it a must that the proposal budget considers postgraduate students as part of the project team? Yes. Again, like I said, it's for capacity building. Okay, why would you hire a research assistant to help you with data collection when there's a master's student in your research team that can do that? Okay, again, this is left to you as the PI, depending on the scope or the specifics of your proposal. But the idea really is that the master students or the postgraduate students, by working with you as research assistants, then they also get to learn how to implement research projects or grants like yours. So really look at it as a capacity building initiative for the postgraduate students that are engaged in your project. Okay. A postdoc as a peer can receive salary from this grant. If you already supported from elsewhere, university is happy to, the contribution of your host institution, for example, can be that to them, they will still pay you a salary to conduct this particular research. That is welcome. But where your host institution does not provide you with that possibility, you're welcome to charge your stipend or salary, again, whatever it is that your host institution calls this, as with reference to the HR provisions of that country or that institution, you can charge it on the grant, on the Arise grant. Okay. And I should also mention that the stipend or salary that you charge on the Arise grant must be guided by the HR provisions of your host institution. Universities would grade you somewhere and have a guideline on where a PI implementing a grant like yours should be based in terms of the salary. And this information will be required. It's part of the due diligence process that is mentioned in the guide for applicants just before award. It's basically to ensure that we are not imposing, as a granting institution, we are not imposing, requirements, or rather, basically that you're able to fit in that host institution together with other researchers in your level of research, so to speak. If the PI allowed to hire a postdoc, like I said, this is entirely up to you and your proposed work. Okay. Factoring the, cognizant of the fact that you already are required to have at least 4 master's students and at least 2 PhD students who should be primarily working as your research assistants. Okay. Aside from strict research merit, to what extent does the Arise ensure address of local needs of researchers, countries that are not directly African? Local needs of researchers' country that are not directly African, again, and gender equality, balance considerations. I don't know what the person asking this question means about countries that are not directly African. The requirement is that, applicants should be African nationals, okay, and the host institutions should have a nationality as the country in which they are hosted. I know that brings up the question of international organizations that are based in particular countries. So, those international countries or organizations have a hosting agreement with a particular country. And if they meet the criteria, the eligibility criteria that is listed on our applications, then they qualify as host institutions. I'm talking about, institutions like ICRAF or UN specialized institutions or things like that. So such institutions may qualify, provided that they meet the eligibility criteria. If you are not sure, please feel free to write to us, and we'll quickly run through the eligibility criteria and look at your proposed host institution to advise you accordingly. Okay. Other considerations in terms of gender balance and all that. Of course, an ideal situation is that we have 50-50 gender balance. And as I say this, I know that we no longer look at gender in a binary lens. So the gender considerations, equality, all those will be done, but not at the expense, not at the expense of scientific merit, as we talked about. So, and we have no plans of any affirmative actions or on the like, because we believe that, people or applicants from all countries, all gender, all considerations are qualified. If you're a scientist, you're qualified, regardless of where you find yourself in all these considerations. But will be looked at. The final selection committee will be considering all this and ensuring that at least we have the face of Africa represented and all those considerations are represented. Okay. Someone is asking if the PI must be the supervisor of the MSc or the postgraduate students. That is left at your discretion. We understand that in some countries, you ought to have achieved some level of scientific qualification for you to be the main supervisor of a postgraduate student, PhD, for example. And for that reason, we've left it open, but at least you need to be one of the supervisors. It could be a co-supervisor. It's good if you are the main supervisor, but if that, your host institution does not allow you to, you can be a co-supervisor or one of the supervisors for the postgraduate students. Our tuition for the students covered. Like I said, it's up to you as the PI and the provisions of your host institution. Please work around your budget and see what is possible. And the bottom line is that you shouldn't leave your students hanging. If you have a student, for example, that can pay for their tuition, all they need is, support on their research work, then by all means, plan that accordingly. Anything on from your end on the chat function? Can research assistants be recruited within 5 years? So remember, the staff that you engage, the research team that you put in place is supposed to be assisting you implement certain aspects of your proposed work. So that means if a particular research assistant that is required for, say, only 1 year or 2 years, then you don't have to engage them for 5 years. Okay. If a master's student, as an example, needs only 2 years to complete their master's program, they don't have to be with you for the rest of the project. So every member of the research team that you put in this in your proposed, in your proposal, the amount of support that is given to them is tied to a particular objective or a particular aspect of the work that you're proposing to do. So please use that as a guide in terms of how long you need to engage and who you need to engage. Because it could be that the research assistants or the students that you engage need specific requirements, specific strength that will be of value to your project. So put all these considerations in place to inform the design of your research team. My university requires that during grant application, we include 15% as administrative and overhead costs. Like I said, our maximum amount is 7% of all eligible direct costs. So like I said, work with your grant accountants and your host institutions. Let them know that this is the requirement. One way, like I said, is to ensure or to look at what they bundle together as administrative and overhead costs, so that if some of these costs qualify as other direct research costs or direct research costs, then they can be redistributed accordingly, so that ultimately you are left with what qualifies or what can only be charged as indirect cost. And if and in the unfortunate event that the university, for example, cannot support you even on this 7% requirement, please feel free to look for another host institution. Okay. The guidelines speak of reimbursement. Yes. So here's the thing. You may propose in your project, in your proposal, that you're going to spend 500,000 euros for the 5 years. Okay. But during the implementation, it only happens that you can only spend 300,000. So that means even if you initially budgeted for 500,000, your grant amount at the end of the project is going to reduce to the amount that was able to be spent. Okay. So, and remember, the disbursements are done based on expenditure. So if you're not able to spend the money that has been given to you according to the agreed disbursement disbursement plan, and then you don't get more funds. So that is what we mean reimbursement. It's not, you don't charge indirect based on the initial budget. You charge indirect cost based on the amount spent in terms of allowable costs. This is the part where you work with your grant accountant from the beginning, so that that understanding is there, and they can also guide you accordingly. If you, for example, you as the PI, just put a figure that and end up underestimating or overestimating, that can give you difficulties in implementing your grant. So that's why we strongly encourage you to work with the grant accountants to ensure that you don't miss out on anything. Okay. I see we have less than 10 minutes left. Quickly run through. Maximum grant amount, I've already talked about that. Collaborators in other countries. Someone is asking if we can consider reducing the grant amount. Remember, you don't have to. The bottom line is, the way we see this, remember, it's not an entirely entry-level grant. We are requiring that you must have some demonstrable and significant research leadership experience for you to be able to provide that leadership to your research team. So it's not an entry-level grant per se. That means, in our estimation, the 500,000 is able to support that team for about 5 years. But that does not mean that you must apply for the entire amount. The amount that you apply for will be dependent on the scope of work that you have proposed. So if your proposal only requires 300,000, please do so. It is this money, the balance that we get from the applications, that then can make it possible for us to award more grants. That's why we say at least 40 grants. It means that we are aware that not everyone would need the 500. And in that case, we may have additional funds that then can support additional grants. I hope that is clear. A number of questions about the risk, buying a car for local travel. Yeah, I think I answered this already. If it's really required and it's justifiable, put it in your proposal. There'll be a budget challenge somewhere in the review process, and you'll have to explain why this is required. Otherwise, it may be easier for you to hire a car based on need instead of buying a car altogether. But again, depending on your proposal, if this is a requirement for your grant, feel free to put it with a justification. Someone is asking, where can one add a justification? As part of, you can do it as when you're filling in details about a budget. There is a place where you provide an explanation or a description or additional information. So you can put the justification there, but also in the body of your, the application form, where there's a part for methodology, the proposed methodology and things like that. There's some fields that have been provided for you. So the methodology, in that field, for example, you can say why you need to hire a car for field work or things like that. Additionally, if those spaces are not enough, you can you can submit a justification as an attachment. There are provisions for you to submit an attachment, a document that provides additional information. So you can do that as your justification. A place for you to attach the justification. Eva, is there any burning ones? If there is need for you to have a full-time administrator that is not a student, again, like I said, it depends on your application. If that is what you will need for your proposal or your proposed work, please do so. Okay. it's absolutely at your discretion. So long as you give us at least 4 students, 4 master students and at least 2 PhDs, then that is okay. Is funding restricted to those at universities alone? No. It can be that right now you're working outside of a university, but for you to implement the grant, the ARISE grant, you need to work to be hosted at an institution that meets our host institution eligibility criteria. In that case, you approach this institution, tell them about your plans, and ask them to support you. And that is proven by, their letter of support. Okay, any other burning ones? So someone is asking about a possibility of having their grant managed in another country when they are working in a different host institution. No, the bottom line is your host institution, where the money will be sent, will be the administrator of your grant. Okay, so please work with your host institution. Merci bien. Les lignes de matrice budgétaire peuvent être augmentées. Il y a d'autres éléments qui figurent. So someone is asking about the application form and asking whether we can expand it. So for now, please use the form as is, okay? We will, if there's, the form is being accessed and used by everyone across, all applicants have the same form. Then the additional information will be provided at the full application stage. Ladies and gentlemen, because of time, I think I would want to stop at that. Thank you very much for these thought-provoking questions. I am really, really happy about the interest, the many questions that are coming through. This is not the end of our support. You're welcome to write to us, send us an email. We'll be able to respond to you and support you even as we as we approach the deadline for the application. So once again, the deadline for application is 30th of July. We shared with you a link for your reference and, for you to be able to access all the documents required. And I know, even as you are the PI for this application, we still want this call to go as far and wide as possible. So please share the link with people within your networks and so that we ultimately don't leave anyone behind. The more applications we receive, the better. I know sometimes that may be seen to be working against you, but in this one, we need everyone on board. And that way, at least we can march forward even as we work towards achieving the Africa we want as envisioned in Agenda 2063. I want to thank my colleagues at the AIS for helping me put together this webinar, the IT team, and we'll be making sure that the link to this recording is available at the webpage for ARISE. I want to thank the interpreters, making sure that the discussions today are also translated into French, Arabic, and Portuguese, so that at least everyone from across the continent is able to connect and get to join us in the discussion. Thank you very much, and until next time, we wish you well. Good afternoon.